Welcome to the Metal Collector. Today I'm going to take a look on 10 hard rock albums I think is a little bit overlooked. Stay tuned. Welcome once again here at the Metal Collector. Like I said, this video will be about 10 albums I think is a little bit overlooked within the hard rock scene. And when I say hard rock, I mean melodic hard rock, AOR, glam rock, hair metal, call it what you want. And it's not like these albums are small masterpieces that people have forgot about or anything. It's just albums I think are a little bit better than they have been given credit for. And some of them have just, I think the reasons why people is not aware of how good these albums actually are is probably also because of the time it was released, or other bands' success has overshadowed it, or something like that. But we'll try to dig into it a little bit more. Let's start out with this one. Number 1, Uriah Heep with Head First. This is from '83, and you know, Uriah Heep is mostly known for the classic stuff from the 70s, and that is also my favorite part of the Uriah Heep discography. But this album is actually pretty good. It's not like I said, it's not any of these albums are masterpieces, but it's a good, decent melodic rock album, almost like an AOR kind of feeling to this one. A lot of keyboards supporting the songs. And Mick Box is the guitar player, is the only founding member left in this band at this point. And on this one they have Lee Kerslake on drums and Bob Daisley on bass, which, you know, should ring a bell to some people. And I think this album is an okay album. It's not the greatest work, not at all, but I've never heard people talk about this album when they're talking about Uriah Heep or just AOR or melodic hard rock or anything. And that's a shame, because it's actually a decent album. The Other Side of Midnight, the opening song, Red Lights, Rolling the Rock, Lonely Nights. There was some great moments on this one. If you don't know this album, check it out. I think the reason why this album, you know, got under the radar, it was '83, you know, new wave of British heavy metal were really cooking at that time, and you know, they also were an active band. They released an album the year before and also the year after this one, so a lot of things were going on. So this could easily have been just another Uriah Heep album, a band trying to survive through the odds at this time. You know, a lot of the old bands really had some hard times so at that point, but Uriah Heep kept on going, and this album, check it out if you don't know it. The next one is, let's take this one, Treat from 1986, the Swedish band Treat. I don't know much about this band. I know this was, the album is called The Pleasure Principle. I don't know much about the band. This is the only release I have in my collection with them. I know this album probably was the biggest success. I bought it way back because of the cover. I was into Rat, among other bands, and I thought this reminded me a little bit of Invasion of Your Privacy with Rat, so I bought this one and checked it out. And this is pretty much AOR in a very pure way, and I like it. It has a little bit, the tendencies of being a little bit too popish are definitely there, but you know, if you're in the right mood for AOR, this album is pretty good. They were from Sweden, and I've read someplace that the reason why this band probably didn't became a very successful band was because of Europe and the success with their, especially the Final Countdown, but the success of Europe overshadowed some of the other melodic hard rock bands a little bit. So Treat was one of those bands that was probably forgotten because of Europe. But this album, The Pleasure Principle, you got Rev It Up, the opening song, Waiting Game, Love Stroke, Caught in the Line of Fire, Strike Without a Warning. There are some really good AOR songs on this one, if you are in the right mood. It's good driving music, I think. A lot of keyboards also here. And I'm not sure, but I think the band continued and probably are still active. I don't really know, but I know this album, and again, it's a band I had never heard about them until I found this album, and I've never heard people talk about them when they're talking about glam or AOR or anything. So I think I'll try one day and dig a little bit deeper into the Treat discography, and until then, check out this album if you don't know it and if you're into that. Now the next album, probably, and I don't hope I offend anybody because that's not my purpose, but this is probably the most gayish cover I've in my whole music collection. Magnum with Vigilante. A unicorn and a lot of pink colors. I didn't buy this for the album cover, but I bought it because of the title track Vigilante. I heard it on YouTube, and I'd heard about Magnum before, but never really digged into it. So when I stumbled upon Vigilante, I don't know, 10 years ago, I had to get this album where it was from, and the local record store had it, and I bought it, and I didn't know what to expect. So I actually was very surprised. It's also AOR, and in its most pure form. I was reading about Magnum afterwards, and also an old band, and this album was a turning point where they tried to become a little bit more mainstream. Didn't know the other early stuff with the band. I still have to check out on Magnum, but they decided to try and do some more mainstream kind of stuff, and this album with the keyboard especially and the songwriting is very good. A lot of hook songs. Lonely Night, the opening song, is good. Need a Lot of Love, Sometime Love is also good. A lot of love titles, but I guess anyway. Holy Rider is also good. Red on the Highway and Vigilante, the title track. I think When the World Comes Down is a little bit too popish for my taste, but again, in the right mood. I love this album because of the songwriting. The songs are strong, and you can hear that it has been written to try and break through. So I think I've never heard anyone speak about this album except for a buddy of mine, where I showed him this album and also played Vigilante, and he was also hooked immediately. He was way much into AOR than me, so he started listening to Magnum after that, and he really liked it. And this is a good album. Myself, I need to check up on the rest of Magnum. I think the following album, I think I read something about that was probably, can't remember. Anyway, let's move on. Next one is with a band from Switzerland called China. This album is glam rock, a fine moment with a lot of great rock tunes. It's from '88. Shout It Out, The Fight Is On, Rock City, Living on the Stage. A lot of great songs on this one. Again, another band that I don't know much about. I bought this, it was cheap, and I looked at the picture, and I had an idea what to expect, and it was spot on. Glam metal, and it's not a brilliant album, but it's a very good glam rock album. And again, I've never heard people talk about this band, and this is the only album I have with them. Also need to check out the rest of the discography. Apparently, what I've read is that the band was actually a name in Switzerland. They had hit the charts with almost all of their releases, but I don't think they're very popular outside of Switzerland. I still think they are playing to this day. So this is definitely a reminder to myself to check out the rest of their albums, and also to you, just check out this album. a very overlooked band and an overlooked album. So let us all try and dig into China's discography. So let's move on to the next one. This is also from Sweden, like with Tree. This is Nasty Idols, the second album, Cruel Intention. A little bit more famous, I suppose. I've heard people talk about this, and they were reunited some years ago and did some albums until the lead singer Andy Pierce. Yeah, he is also a producer of this album. Andy Pierce died, so I don't think this album is active anymore after his death. Rest in peace, by the way. But this album, I bought it way back when I started listening to hard rock, and I found it also cheap, and I just saw the cover and thought, okay, I love Guns N' Roses, and this looks like something in the same vein. And it was, but I was a little bit disappointed overall. But I gave it some more spins in the years to come, and by time, the years went on, and I listened to it more and more, and suddenly it just grew on me. So this album, I really consider this to be a very good glam rock album. Also the vinyl edition. The Way You Walk, Don't Tear It Down, Alive and Kicking, Bitch, Can't Get You Off of My Mind, West Coast City Rockers. There's a lot of great tunes on this. It's just good, plain, straight glam rock. Some fine moments. Not a masterpiece, but it's a good album. Another band where I have to check up on more from their hand. I've heard the follow-up for this one. What's it called? Vicious, I think that was the title. I don't own it, but I don't own it. But I've heard it, and it sounds almost just as good as this. But I have to get my hands in the rest of their stuff as well. But again, there's a lot of bands I need to. Yeah, it's about money and time. Let's go to Denmark. A band with the strange name Y, like in the letter Y. And the album Raw Child. This is from the beginning of the 90s, I think 91, and it's the second album with this melodic hard rock band. A good album, not a masterpiece, but just a plain good, solid melodic rock album. It's a band that was started by Jens Cheyenne, is what he's calling himself on this one, I think. And he was the original singer and bass player in the Danish punk band Bratz that later on became Merciful Fate. And Jens also played, what was the name? Geisha, I think that was a project he had, also with some known musicians. And then he started this band with Oliver Stephenson, who was a guitar player in Mike Tramp, the guy from White Lion. He had a band called Freak of Nature, and I think Oliver was playing in that band, and him and Jens decided to do this. On this album, we got Hal Patino as well on the bass from King Diamond. And it was a short-lived project. They did only 2 albums with this one. And Jens moved on to play. Also, Hal moved on, and Oliver moved on. They all moved on to play in other bands. But Jens, he has played bass and guitar for lots of heavy metal and rock bands afterwards. And this has been also in the Danish hard rock and metal history. This album has, or just the 2 albums, the band itself has almost been forgotten. It was just another project for Jens. So people often seems to forget this. I haven't heard people talk about this much, and especially not Raw Child. I like this album. Will never be my favorite rock album, but it's just good, plain, simple, melodic rock. So the next one is by, let's take this. Aerosmith with 9 Lives. We all know Aerosmith. You like them or you don't like them. That's it. But it's funny with a band like Aerosmith, you can almost split up their career. You have the 70s, and you have the dark period where the drugs really had taken over, and you have the comeback where Joe Perry returned to the band, and they all returned to the band, and it was the original five, and they did Permanent Vacation and Pump and those classic later 80s albums, and beginning of the 90s with Get a Grip, and then the compilation big ones that really became popular. Later in the 90s they released this one. I bought it when it was released, and I was very much hooked on it immediately. Yeah, you have some of the softer tendencies that the band really started to evolve. I don't like when they do these typical Aerosmith ballads from the later period in their career, like Hole in My Soul. Fallen Angels also have a little bit of that. You know, the song they did from Armageddon and all that. I'm not into the ballads there. I love Dream On, for example, the old ballad. I think the two favorite albums I have with Aerosmith is probably the debut album and Toys in the Attic. But this one is definitely also on my top list. And it's very highly overlooked, I think. Some people say they like the album, and some people say I haven't heard it, and that's it. But there are so many great moments here. Also very hard rocking. Nine Lives, the title track, is one of the greatest songs by Aerosmith. And Falling in Love is hard on the knees. A little popish mid-tempo hard rocker. Taste of India. Full Circle is very good. Something's Gotta Give is good. Crash is damn good. Yeah, there are also a couple of fillers as well, and like I said, some ballads that you can skip. But in general, this is a very good Aerosmith album, and it's a shame people don't appreciate this more than they do. Really like that album. Let's move on to, how many albums were that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's move on to Motley Crue and New Tattoo. This is also, you know, speaking of Motley Crue, we all know the first 5 albums. And then people still debate whether the Motley Crue album, where Vince was gone and they got John from the vocal, some people actually think that is the best Motley Crue album because they don't like Vince's vocals. Generation Swine is a strange album, but this one, when we came after the millennium, this is from 2001. No, it's from 2000. The year 2000. When this came out, it was just like, okay, they tried to do something that sounds to be from 2000, but also to maintain some of the classic stuff. And the songs are not as strong as on the old first albums, no. But still, this is a very good rock album. And people often seems to forget this. Tommy is not playing the drums, it's Randy Costello, and he's doing a hell of a job. And they all just do what they do best. They just rock. You have Hell on High Heels, New Tattoo, of course, Drag Strip Superstar, Hollywood Ending, Porn Star, White Punks on Dope. There's a lot of great songs on this album. Yeah. So just, Motley Crue is one of the biggest rock bands ever in the history of music, but just don't forget New Tattoo because it's a better album than people seems to give it credit for. I really enjoy it. And in the same time, this is probably from 2001, the next one. Yes, The Cult with Beyond Good and Evil. I bought this when it was released because I was the Cult fan. You know, we all know the old stuff from the 80s with Electric and Love and Sonic Temple, which is my favorite probably. This album really shows a band that still maintain the old vibe. You can easily hear it's the Cult. And I remember when it got out, it got some pretty good reviews, but then it just disappeared and people didn't talk about it. And when you're debating with people about the Cult, a lot of people seems to forget this album. And it annoys me because it's actually really good. It's not completely up there with the old classic albums, no. But it's like with Aerosmith and Motley Crue, like I just showed you. It's it's a fine album, and don't forget it because you have War, The Presence, The Saint, Take the Power, Breathe, American Gothic. There are so many good songs, tracks on this album. Especially the first half of it. It's just filled with classic, the cult moments. Um, yeah, so highly recommendable. The last one is with LA Guns, Man in the Moon. Even though Tracy Guns was an important piece in the Guns N' Roses history, and Guns N' Roses is my favorite band, like I always says. Even though he was a big part in their story, I've never really digged so much into LA Guns. I know the old stuff, and I know that they had this big fraud where Tracy went one way and what's his name, Phil? Uh, yeah, Phil Lewis. He went on, and suddenly there were two LA Guns bands playing. They have been reunited today, but back then, I think it's not the last album Tracy was involved with. They did the album afterwards. What was that called? Um, can't remember the name, but that was the last album Tracy participated on before moving on to Brides of Destruction, I think, and there was some other stuff going on, and he went on and formed his LA Guns project again, and there were two bands. It was pretty, it was pretty fucked up. So, but it's not the reason why I've never followed LA Guns that close. It was just I enjoyed the old albums, but it was not a band I thought were up there with, for example, Guns or Motley Crue or some of the other of my favorites from the glam metal department. But anyway, back to this album. I bought this also because it was cheap in a bunk somewhere and brought it home, and I think it's not a brilliant album. The old stuff is better, in my opinion, but it's still a very decent, good rock album. And I've never heard people recommend this album when they are talking about LA Guns. They often talks about the album that follows this, or some of the early stuff, or anything else almost. But I enjoy this album, and I think we all should give it some more chances. So, LA Guns. But I don't know. I've always felt I needed to give the band more credit in my own world as well, instead of just focusing on the early stuff. I have to check out what they have done recently. I think they have done an album last year or this year or something. So I need to check up on this as well. But this album, I can recommend this if you're into. It's a good driving album. So, and very overlooked. So that was 10 hard rocking albums, AOR, melodic rock, glam, hair metal, call it what you want, with some interesting bands that we all need to pay more attention to, I think. So hope you like this, and hope you will seek out some of these albums and check them out. I think I'll be listening to some of these later on today as well. And until then, until the next video. Oh yeah, just one thing. I was considering to do a competition because I can see on my subs they are almost up at 80 subs. And thank you very much for subscribing to this channel, and thank you for all your comments and the support. But I think I will do a competition when I are almost reaching 100 subscribers. So I hope that will not be too long from here. And I've not completely figured out how I want to do the competition, but I think I will do one. And I'll try and make it fun and interesting and a little bit fucked up, hopefully. I'll try and see what I can come up with. Until next time and in the next video, stay metal and rock and all that out there, and have a nice day. Cheers.